Well, it's 10 o'clock. I would very much like to welcome everybody to this seminar on club directing. And I want to emphasize that we're not trying to do training as such in this session. We're trying to support one another in the always a fun and challenging task of directing club sessions, and especially doing so in a friendly and fair manner. And we expect to learn from one another from our experiences. Hopefully, we'll be quite interactive. One of the challenges we have is keeping up with any changes in the current regulations. And I'm going to hand over now to Jonathan, who's going to bring us up to date on that subject. So, Jonathan, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Just as a slight side note while I share my screen, this was originally entitled Changes to the Laws, and the laws do change. They're reviewed every 10 years, but the current set we have, which my law book has just did, are from 2017. So they are starting to think about change. Well, starting to think about the upcoming version, which will be in 2027. And as you can imagine, getting global agreement on changes takes some time, so it's a long process. And we do have, Gordon will be involved in that process. So if you do have any feedback about things that you think ought to be changed or might be better to be changed, then I'm sure he'd appreciate that feedback. Anyway, I will share this. So in terms of not laws, but regulations. So just to clarify the difference. So the laws are set by the WBF, and the laws are what we're all used to in our yellow books there. And that's the laws, and the laws are universal worldwide, apart from a few things where it says the regulating authority can vary them. The regulations are what the EBU prescribes, which are to do with alerting and announcing and permitted bids and understandings and all that. So that's the difference between the laws, which are universal worldwide, and the regulations, which are specific to England. So the regulations do get reviewed. They usually, when there are changes, they usually come in from August, from the time of Eastbourne, and there were some changes this year. There were quite a number of changes, although I would say that most of them probably don't affect club players very much. So they this very useful announcement and alert summary has been produced. So we'll just quickly look down this, and I can highlight where things have changed. So we've got some more announcements than we had before, but again, for people playing. So, well, if we start at the beginning. So the opening bids of one club that's been announced for a while, as has your no trump range. Similarly, 2 level bids have been announced for, that hasn't changed. 2 no trumps, that was announced for a while, and then we stopped announcing it. That didn't actually change this year, that changed earlier. The reason for that, because I know people, I do get asked this, is that it was felt that when you heard round the room 1920, 2021, you could, if you heard a number of tables, you could fairly quickly work out exactly how many points your partner had, and also so many people just play it as natural, that at that point in the auction, it is very rare that your opponents need to know precisely the range. So, and obviously, if they are playing it something unusual like both minors, they will alert anyway. So, the downsides of announcing it were more than the benefits. And obviously for the defence, when it does matter, you can check at the start of the play. So what has changed? One thing that has changed is here, where people, or rather this bit, where people are bidding a no trump in response to an opening bid of one of a suit. So again, if you're playing Ecole, then you will bid a no trump with sort of 5 to 9, and there's no announcement or alert or nothing, and nothing's changed. For people who are playing 2/1 or systems where a no trump can be wide ranging with more than 10 points, then it's now announced regardless of whether, if it's non-forcing, you just say up to 11, and if it's forcing, you say forcing, and if there are specific further things like may have a weak raise, then you say that. So that's a small change. It's useful when people are playing 2/1 because it just helps the opponents know what's going on without having to ask, which may give away that they have interest or don't have interest. But yes, won't be relevant for a lot of club players. Another thing that has changed, again, it won't come up very often, but it is potentially useful, is if it goes a heart past 3 diamonds. Now, if you play 3 diamonds as natural and non-forcing, you would now say natural and non-forcing. If you play it natural and game forcing, as in a strong punch shift, you would say natural and game forcing. If you play a heart past 3 diamonds as showing nothing about diamonds and showing a race of hearts, then you would still alert it as you did before. But this just avoids the issue where it went a heart past 3 diamonds and it was alerted, and you didn't know whether it was diamonds or diamonds and it was being alerted because it was non-forcing, or a heart raise, and that potentially caused some issues. So now if it goes a heart past 3 diamonds and you play that as natural non-forcing, you would just say natural non-forcing. So I mean, all these things, it's just trying to clear up situations and make it and yeah, try and stop the other side not be. We don't want the other pair to be disadvantaged by the methods that are being played. And
so I've got a quick question for you, Jonathan. Thank you so much for going through that. At a club, how important is it, or when is it important if someone gets this wrong? In other words, they don't alert when they should have done, or even they alert when they should have done, when they shouldn't have done, which is also, not uncommon. What should the director do in those situations?
Well, I think there's a very important sentence here which says, "Please be tolerant of opponents alert when they should announce, or announce when they shouldn't." And yes, I think this is. I mean, the regulations are here, but we appreciate that lots of people are not going to read this, and they will just do what feels right to them. And I think the directors should be tolerant, and you as players should be tolerant of each other. Because I mean, in the situation where it really has caused someone to have a misunderstanding, and it has had an impact, then the director might need to look at making an adjustment. But I think in most cases, you can. In most cases, you may be able to ask if you suspect something is not natural, and just using some common sense and being tolerant of each other, I think, yeah, should cover the vast majority of cases. And yes, and then the director can always make an adjustment if there really has been an issue.
Gordon, you wanted to comment on this as well.
Yes, I just wanted to say that we need to remember that the overriding aim of all of this is to ensure that your opponents know what's going on. That's what it's really about. It's making sure that they have the same information that you and your partner do. And if people fail to do it in precisely the right way, nobody should worry too much about that. We do have prescribed ways because they've been thought to be the best way of doing it without causing other problems, other unintended problems. But somebody who says not quite the right words or whatever, or they announce a little bit more than they should, people shouldn't worry too much about that. And if the tournament director's called, the tournament director's main role should be to clarify what's required and say, well, you didn't do it exactly the right way, this is what you should have said. But by and large, over announcing is not a terrible thing. And it's one of the reasons why we have as many announcements as we do, is that people like them, people understand them. They over the last few years, number of years since we introduced them, we found that people were extending them themselves. They were saying more as announcements than they were required to. So that's why announcements have been extended. They work and they're popular.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any quick questions on this before we move on?
We should probably also quickly just cover doubles, but only to say that previously you had to a double of a suit bid was presumed to be takeout, and if it was penalties, then you had to alert. Whereas now, after the first round of bidding, any double that is takeout or penalties is not alerted. Only doubles with, as it says there, an unexpected specific meaning, e.g. a number of controls relating to another suit, weakness in a bid suit or lightener, would be alerted. So after the first round of the bidding, most doubles would not be alertable.
Yeah, Bob, you had a question.
Yeah, sorry, I was a bit slow getting my hand up, but Johnson was going through the announcements that should be made over opening bids. I'm not quite clear what should be done over artificial two-level bids like two clubs. Should they just say strong or game forcing, or should they just alert?
So two clubs, if it's a strong artificial bid, nothing to do with clubs, then it should be alerted as it always has been. If it's a natural two-level bid, then you would say weak, intermediate, strong forcing, whatever's applicable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, thanks again.
One thing that's worth mentioning in that two clubs is that people often ask or get wrong about precision. A precision two clubs, classic precision two clubs, is an intermediate opening, and it should just be announced as intermediate. And that applies whether or not it shows a 6-card suit, or it might be a 5-card suit with an outside 4-card suit. So just say intermediate if it's natural and that strength, regardless of whatever else it may show.
Excellent. So I think the short summary is that if you want to see what's changed, and then look at this announcements table, which is very useful, and we'll include this link in what we send out at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, you've already heard from Gordon, but I'd like to formally introduce him now. He is both the Chief Executive of the English Bridge Union and also the Chief Tournament Director. And I'm going to just ask him a few questions to understand a bit better what his role is in that regard. So if you could stop sharing your screen, Jonathan. Yeah, that's lovely. And Gordon, just to give us a bit of background, how did you first come to be involved in directing bridge?
Well, it was completely accidental, actually. I went along to play a game of bridge. I hadn't been playing that long again as an adult. I'd played before as a child. Somebody's got some noise in the background. If they could mute, that's great. I went along to play a game of bridge, and the person who was meant to be running the game had a row and didn't turn up. So we were all left there. Nobody really seemed to know should be done, but I had an idea of how it was done, even though I'd never done it. And it was either I run the game or we don't have a game. So I ran the game, and people said to me, "Oh, that went well." So from there, I sort of started doing a bit more. But at various times in my life since then, this is a bit more than 20 years ago now, lots of opportunities have come up for me to direct, and a lot of people have encouraged me to. And I seem to have just been in the right place at the right time on a number of occasions, and it all went from there. So just a chance encounter, somebody not turning up to run the game, and that's how I first became involved.
Well, I think that was a very happy accident for the rest of us. So, but it can seem a bit of a thankless task, directing. What do you find enjoyable about it? Because I know it is something that you do positively enjoy, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, yes, I do. And I think that any director who directs for a long time has to enjoy it, otherwise you wouldn't do it. Of course, there are some times when it's not so enjoyable, because you are the face of the organization, the face of the game, and if things go wrong, people will come to you about them. So you do need to remember that it's not personal, or generally it's not personal. Occasionally when people criticize, it's intended to be personal, but by and large, you're the director, you're there, and that's all it's there for. But what's enjoyable is simply seeing the game run well, doing things, and it's pretty much like anything else that you organize, any organizational thing. You do it because you want it to work well, and if it does work well, then that's satisfying. If it doesn't work well, then you look and see how you could improve, or occasionally there are things that are a bit out of your control, but by and large there's something that can be learned from it. So I suppose that's the other thing. You're always learning. Doesn't matter how long you do it for, you can get things wrong, and you can look at them and learn. The other nice thing about being a director when it's a large event, as some of our EBU events or some international events, is that you're part of a team, and then you're working together with colleagues and you're supporting each other, and that's also very enjoyable.
So you have this somewhat intimidating title, Chief TD. What does a Chief TD actually do?
Well, I'm sorry if it's intimidating. It's certainly not meant to be, but it's in fact, Chief TD is used in a couple of different ways. If you're talking about at a congress, then the Chief TD is simply the tournament director in charge. And in fact, in terms of the laws, there is really only one tournament director, and all the other ones are helpers. If you look in the wording of the laws, so that's the Chief TD there. As regards the EBU, the role is simply one of being the TD who is in overall charge of the provision of tournament directing services. So looking at how the tournament directors are appointed, trying to help them with training, help them with answers. I get asked a lot of questions by members who write to me, things like that. In fact, since I've been the chief executive as well, my Chief TD role is much smaller, and I have Robin Barker is the deputy chief TD, and he does a lot of the organisational things for me about organising tournament directors for events. And then we have a number of other national TDs, of whom Jonathan is one of them, who do a lot of other answering of questions. Jonathan particularly because he's also a staff member. So when people phone the office and they want to have an answer from someone senior, then Jonathan tends to be the person that it goes to. So yeah, it's mostly organisational. My predecessor's Chief TD, Max Bavin, used to be almost entirely organisational. I still do some actual directing on the floor. Mostly it's trials for things like the Premier League. But I'm very happy to keep directing, and I direct as well for the European Bridge League and the World Bridge Federation. So I do like to keep my hand in. If you don't actually direct, then you get a little bit out of touch, and so I think it's important to do that.
So there is this kind of philosophical question as to, we play bridge for fun, to enjoy ourselves. So why are we so concerned about what you might describe, every jot and tittle of the law and regulations? Do they really matter so much when we're just playing to have fun?
Well, they do matter, and I think it's worth remembering that bridge is a game, and games have laws, regulations, rules. That's what a game is. Without rules, a game is absolutely nothing. Now, part of having those rules, they tell you what to do, but they also tell you what happens when something goes wrong. And bridge, luckily, is based on the idea that people don't generally do things wrong deliberately. So it's simply a matter of how do we deal with it. Now, if people are told that right from the very beginning, I used to teach bridge to complete beginners, and I found that if you started off by saying this, of course you have to follow the laws, but if you get something wrong, the director will sort it out. They all understood. In fact, I've had people surprised that there wasn't more of a penalty for getting things wrong when they knew. It's all about ensuring that the game is the same for everyone and is understood by everyone. And as long as things are uniformly applied and fairly applied and done in a pleasant way, there's no need for anyone to be unpleasant, even if you're giving people a penalty. You can do it politely and fairly and just say, you know, that's the consequence of this. Then I think that's perfectly reasonable. But you're right that the main thing should be about friendliness. We should all be friendly. We don't want people saying, I'm going to call the director on you. I want people to say, oh, something's gone wrong, let's call the director who will help us sort it out. And that's why we as directors always train to come to the table and say, how can I help you? Or words to that effect. We don't want to be, when I first started playing, there was a director who used to come up and say, okay, who's done something wrong then? And that's completely the wrong approach. He possibly meant it as a joke, but people who didn't know him may not have interpreted that. So yes, it's about friendliness, but friendliness doesn't exclude playing to the rules, and that's why we have them. They're there, they make the game work, and they let people know what's going to happen if something goes wrong.
So there is a question that interests me, Gordon, about club bridge, which is, I mean, I did once think that all the laws and regulations were fixed, nothing we do about them, but then I discovered that actually clubs do have a certain amount of autonomy over some aspects of the way bridge is played. And I think it has to do with what the law book calls the regulating authority. Could you just unwrap that for me and tell me in what sort of situations the club can have its own policies?
Yes, absolutely. And Jonathan mentioned it earlier when he talked about the regulating authority and difference between regulations and laws. And essentially, regulations can be made by the regulating authority, whoever that is. And in the EBU, we say that the regulating authority for any club is the club itself. That means that clubs are allowed to make regulations, the things that we have in the blue book and the white book, which are regulations. Clubs are allowed to change them if they want, as long as they don't come into conflict with the laws, which are the universal thing. So if they want to do something different, then they can do. Now, we don't encourage it a lot for the simple reason that lots of players play in more than one club. And if you play in one club and it's one way and you play in another club, it's another way, it becomes confusing. Nobody knows what's going on. But if a club does feel very strongly about something, then they're entitled to do that. And in particular about system regulations, you know, if you wanted by and large to allow most things, but you didn't want to allow a multi-2 diamond opener, then you can do that as a club. You can say, we don't allow this. You can change your regulations, but what you can't do is change the laws. And the laws, for example, say you're allowed to depart from your agreement. So you can't say as a club, we're banning Sykes, because Sykes are permitted by the laws of bridge. So that's where the distinction comes in. But clubs who raise questions with me about the regulations, I do always say, well, of course, if you don't like this regulation, you are allowed to change it. But the danger is that then your players, if they go and play somewhere else, they may find it confusing that it's done in a different way in the other club.
Yeah, and I suppose it goes without saying that if you do vary the regulations, you need to make sure people are informed about how you varied them.
Absolutely, yes, people should know. Although, to be honest, most clubs don't really say very much about what regulations they're playing under. So if you ask most clubs about the game, are you playing under level 2 or level 4 or whatever, most of them haven't really said very much, haven't thought a lot about it. It's only when problems arise that it needs to be clarified. But for most people, they get through, certainly smaller clubs, they just get by people playing, and as long as there's proper disclosure of what's being done, nobody has a problem with it.
So I want to just talk a little bit about some of the resources available to us, and in particular the books. I think we all understand what the short law book is all about, and we understand what the blue regulation book is all about, even though some of them seem quite abstruse at club level. But there's also a very fat white book which is regularly updated, and that can be a bit more puzzling. Is it part of the rules? And what point, when will we be expected to consult it as club directors?
Well, it is primarily for directors, and it's there to give guidance, and it gives guidance not only about the regulations in the blue book, but also guidance about the laws themselves. So if there's something in the laws that you look up and you think, I'm not quite sure what that means, then you can look in the white book. And the end section of the white book is numbered according to the law number, the 8th section. So if you look up law 23 and you think, I'm not sure I really understand that, then you can go into the white book and look up section 823, and there it will be if there's anything. There isn't always something about all laws, because many of them are completely straightforward. But I think the best way to think about it is that the blue book tells people what they're meant to do and what they're allowed to do. The white book tells TDs in particular, but some players are interested in it, tells them what happens when things go wrong, when things have not followed what is required in the blue book. So that's the way to think of it. It's the guidance that's there. We don't expect many people to sit down and read the white book as light reading in the evening. In fact, most of them don't do it in the blue book, although when you asked me about starting as a director, when I first joined the EBU, I was sent what was then the orange book as a new member, and I did sit and read it. So maybe that was an indication that I was destined to become a tournament director. But I know most people don't read these books, and they don't need to. They're there for guidance, for reference. And the white book is a great book, although it's very large. That's its great strength, is that it covers almost everything. There are a number of countries around the world who say, whenever we don't have a regulation that covers a situation, we follow the white book, the EBU white book. And that's because they recognize it as having been created very thoroughly by knowledgeable people over a great many years, and they find it useful. I was even at a European Bridge League event once where something occurred that they didn't have a regulation for, and one of the top tournament directors said to me, does the white book say anything about this? And I said yes, and they followed it. So its complexity, while it may be a bit off-putting for people to look at, it really is its strength. It has an awful lot of useful information in. For example, you have an important club event and club championship, and there's a tie at the end, and you think, oh, we've never said anything about how we deal with ties. You can look in the white book and it will lead you through a whole range of tests to determine who the winner is. After about 12 different things, if you're still got a tie, it ends up with and toss a coin to determine who it is. But I've never yet known it get to that stage. It covers everything so thoroughly that you don't need to get there. So yes, that I hope explains the difference.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much. And needless to say, it's a free download on our website if you're wondering where to find it. So I just want to touch on another subject. I mean, let's being honest, there are a lot of nuances and complexities to bridge law and regulations, and sometimes when we're in a club session and we're thinking about all sorts of other things at the time, like, you know, is this a slow round? Do I need to call them all the other things in our heads? It can be difficult to know all the answers at the table. What should we do when we're really not sure what to do? How can we get help?
Well, the main thing to remember is that many situations that arise don't need you to make a decision right at that moment. And that you can divide the kind of cases you're called for into a few different things. Now, some of them are purely mechanical, like a lead out of turn, and it's a good idea for tournament directors. It's the one thing that tournament directors would be well advised to learn how to deal with it, because the laws themselves are a bit all over the place about that. So if you learn how to deal with that, then you can do that at the table. Then similarly, if there's an exposed card, you can deal with that at the table. But many things don't need to be done immediately. If there's a revoke, you need to be able to say whether the revoke is established or not, but you can still go away at the end and have a look at the law book and see how many tricks it is. You don't need to know that immediately. And if there are things that are more complex, like people are raising questions about unauthorized information. Now, most clubs, that doesn't happen very much because people do have this quite easygoing attitude towards it. But if it does come up, you don't need to make a decision then and there. You can go away, you can consult people. Talking to strong players in the club is one thing you can do. You can phone a tournament director. We've got numbers on the website where you can phone. And if you've got a bit more time, you can send a message to one of the various forums. The EBU has various forums that are well served for tournament directors, and there are other bridge forums, and you can ask a question there. So the first thing is, if you're not sure what to do, don't panic. Try and find someone else to do it. And secondly, remember that you don't generally need to make a decision then and there. But if you do need to make a decision then and there, and you decide that you've made a wrong decision, the laws tell you how to deal with that as well, a thing called director's error. And essentially you go back, and you don't need to beat yourself up about it. All tournament directors have made an error on occasions, and what you do is you go back and you adjust the score, and you treat both sides as non-offending, so that neither of them is disadvantaged by any slight slip you might have made.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And just finally, Gordon, are there any things that you would like every director to know or do that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, we have talked about it, but the most important thing, and it stands being said again and again, is friendliness, welcoming. That's really what the director is there for, is to set the tone of the game. And if the director makes people feel welcome and always approaches the table in a friendly manner, then the club is likely to be doing well.
Thank you so much. And just to remind you, if anyone has any questions, by all means, type them in the chat. We can come back to them. I think unless there's anything very pressing, I think it'd be best, bearing in mind the time, just to move on now. So I'm going to ask Jonathan to tackle the interesting topic of what to do when something goes wrong with the electronic scoring and the Bridgemates or whatever you happen to use. So, Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. So there's obviously various ways that things can go wrong. So this is based on I get some, in my role as club liaison officer, I get calls from clubs with a variety of issues from time to time. So this is based on the sort of calls I get most often. So if we just share my screen. See yourselves from that. So this is, so hopefully you can see my screen and you can see EBU score. So this is one that I get from time to time, which is that I get called at the end of a session or potentially the next day, and they say, well, we played our session and all the results went into the Bridgemate fine, into the Bridgemate units at the table fine, and we were able to see the other results and see our percentages on the Bridgemate at the end. But when we came back to the computer, it was showing no results had been received, which is what you're seeing here. Just to explain this, EXP is expected and the RX is received. So this is saying that it's received naught results for each round. Just to say, I've set this up as a 3-table, 3-round duplicate because I didn't want to type in too many scores. I appreciate that you'll probably be playing slightly more than that, but the principles are the same. So what do you do? Well, the fact that the Bridgemates were sending the scores means the scores have made it to the server. And if the scores are in the server, then you just need to reestablish then the fact that they haven't made it to EBU score means that the connection between EBU score and the scoring program must have been lost somehow. And so you just need to reestablish that, and then you should get your results through. So you can see, in fact, that this is saying inactive when it should be active during a session. Now, this can easily happen because if you have gone to here, for example, to do player names, that's fine. But if you have then accidentally gone exit event and come back out to here, then this will cause your Bridgemates to go inactive if you'd already started them before that. But you can easily recover it. So what you do, go back into the event, go to Bridgemate scoring. So at the moment, as you can see, is inactive. So we say create database. And if we've already done it, then it will give us the option, do we want to start or resume? So if we're trying to recover it, we say resume. And in fact, it's in fact now found all the results even without me starting Bridgemate control, because they were already in the database and it's got that file there. And you can see now it's gone back to active. And it's always, if it doesn't immediately come through, then what you can do is launch the BCS. So it will say, because you've just chosen resume, it will say launch without server reset, which means it's not going to reset the server, so the information in the server won't be lost. So you'll restart it. Come on. Things always take longer when you're trying to demo something. And you can see here that you've got all your results here. And the other thing that's useful that I try and explain to people is you go to round monitor here, and you can see here the numbers. A green shows that the round has been complete. You can see here I've got my 3 tables and my 3 rounds, and they're all complete. So that means all the results are in Bridgemate control. So yeah, if your results are all showing here, and this is active, but for any reason they haven't all come through here, you've got read all results here. So if you're missing any results, you can always click that and that will read them through again. If you have changed, the only thing to be aware of doing that is that it will reread what was put in the Bridgemate. So if you've done any corrections in EBU score, like if someone came and told you that the score was put in wrong and you've changed it in EBU score, that will get the Bridgemate score will get rewritten. So it would overwrite your correction, which is why it's always better to correct things in the Bridgemate. That way, if you do have to reread the scores, you'll have the correct information. And just in case anyone's not aware, the way you can correct a score in the Bridgemate is by going to TD menu and then putting in the TD pin, and then it's option 3 to delete a score, and then you can push it in again. Obviously, it needs to be the Bridgemate from the appropriate table. And even if it's a later round, that's fine. You just need to be at the right table. You can also use TD menu option 2 to view the result before you delete it, just to check that it is the result you're expecting. So that's a that's one issue where the results aren't showing in EBU score at the end of the session. So I'm just going to try something slightly more complicated. So I'll just close Bridgemate control software again, come out of this event, go into my next event. So again, here we have no results. Now, this is something that I get called about, and I'm not actually quite sure how this happens, but I do get called about it occasionally. So if we create our database for this session and launch BCS, you can see that we have no results at all. And we have no results here either. Now, sometimes it seems that clubs manage to get into this situation where they have played their session, the results have all gone in via the Bridgemates into the server, but when they get to the end, they appear to have no results in Bridgemate control and no results in EBU score. Now, I should stress, I don't think this is possible, but clubs do manage to get to this situation. The good thing is that you don't need to worry because you can still recover it, because provided the Bridgemates haven't been used again, the Bridgemates will still remember their scores in their memory, and you can resend them to the server. So first you need to come to backup scores here and tick this box that says accept manually resent backup scores from Bridgemate. You then need to take a Bridgemate. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, I can just about show you this. So, so what you could do, so this is the Bridgemate on its first home screen. And you can see here, you may not be able to see, but it says setup here. Oops. Oh. And if I press that, it will ask me for the setup pin. Now, people may not know the setup pin for 7 is 749. That's true for any Bridgemate anywhere. 749. No, can't see what I'm doing. And then you get onto this screen, which is where you can specify the section, the number, the language, if you want to test your players and try the Bridgemates in a different language. What we want is where it says info, which is on the right, and then it says resend. So if we press resend,
it has resend. Oh.
It says table A1, scores in memory 9, press OK to resend all scores. So we'll press OK. And look, we now have all the results from table 1 have come back. So then all you need to do is take your other Bridgemates and just do the same thing. There we go, that's table 2. And
Table 3.
Oh. And table 3. So you can see we now have all our results and they've fed through to EBU score. So even if Bridgemate control is showing that it has no results at the end, you can always still get them back from the Bridgemate. Now, for this reason, I would always suggest that you have your Bridgemate set to specific tables, because when if you have put the Bridgemates back in the box and then you need to do this and you don't know which ones were used, it makes it a bit more complicated. You could still do it, but you just end up resending scores from other weeks and then it complains that the pair numbers are wrong. So it's much easier if you know which Bridgemates were used. And so I would always suggest to have the Bridgemate set to specific tables. As in there is a Bridgemate that always goes on table 1, table 2, table 3. And again, this can be done in the setup. because I know some clubs have it set to scan or select, where when you take when the player takes the Bridgemate at the start of the session, he puts in they put in the table number, and then that Bridgemate is used at, for example, table 5 for that session. But I would recommend to have them set to specific tables, so that if you're trying to do this, you know which table they were used at. So that's about recovery of results. There's one other thing which I will just mention, because this does come up on a not infrequent basis, which is that if you've played your session, well, if you've already set up and started your session, and then you realise that you haven't got a that you've actually got a half table when you thought you had a full table. Now you can correct that at the time you can go back and select your movement again while you're playing, and just say that now you've got a missing pair, North South 3, for example. Make sure retain results is ticked. Make sure that if you're adding to the East West, it's set to the same as before. And I know there used to be a bug where if you had set it to something like this, it would then default back to there. And that will be in the next version of EBU score that comes out shortly. That will be fixed. But so you can add the missing pair and then go OK, and it will say previous. It will confirm everything again. It's got the missing pair. Say previous results retained. So you say yes. And then you would just need to go to Bridgemate scoring and update the movement. So you say update movement. Say yes. And it will then, you'll then see here. Come on. Yeah, so it's now sent the new movement with the missing pair. Now, if you don't feel brave enough to do that because you don't want to start adjusting the movement in the middle of the session, the other thing you can do is just leave the half table there, put no play into the Bridgemates to get them passed on to the next round. And then at the end, you'll have results which include a pair that doesn't exist and which will have 0%. Now, the simple way then to get rid of that pair from your results is to go to Properties. So from the event menu here, go to Properties, and here you will see there is a miss, which stands for missing tick box, and that's the pair that we just said didn't exist. But if all your pairs are there, you can just tick that box and it will exclude that pair from the results. And then when you upload to Bridgewebs and to the EBU, that pair will be excluded. The issue otherwise is if you upload your results to the EBU and there is a pair who have scored 0%, the NGS will refuse that and say they don't believe that's true, and so the session won't process for NGS. So very, very simple, easy solution. Just tick the miss tick box for the pair that don't exist before you do your uploads, and then it will all work fine. Right, I think that's the things I'd noted down to cover. So again, happy to take any questions now or at the end.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And that is absolute magic. 749 is the magic number which will retrieve your lost session. So I think if you remember nothing else from this seminar and ever have to tangle with Bridgemates, then that is a very, very useful thing to know. So thank you so much. Yeah.
We've got a question in the chat from Patsy about online bridge. And a very important question, because of course I didn't mention online at all, and there's some very important differences between online and face-to-face. Online in many ways makes life easier for us because people can't lead out of turn, they can't revoke, they can't do any of those kinds of things, but then it brings its own problems with it, and we have to deal with people who lose connection or who don't play fast enough. And I think probably those are the main things that are dealt with by tournament directors in online tournaments. So being able to have someone who can fill in if somebody loses their connection, and that's one of the ways in which robots are a great advantage, that you can just get a robot in to finish the board, and that helps things a lot. When people are slow, it does depend very much which platform you're playing on. If you're playing on BBO, then somebody who's slow will simply have the board taken away from them when the move is made. If you're playing on somewhere like RealBridge, it follows the normal face-to-face regulations much better, and they will be allowed to finish playing the board before they move. So it's a bit like calling the move with one table still in play, and that can do that. So I think those are probably the main things. There are other ways in which online helps a tournament director, in that you can normally see something in a log. You can tell if somebody says they were rude to me, well, you can look and see exactly what they did say. Or if they say they were very slow, then you can generally have a look and see about the time. So advantages, but being a TD online is much more tech involved than it is face to face. But it's important to remember, even if you're online and you're typing things, still be friendly. It's often the case that something can come across more unfriendly if it's typed than if you've got someone saying it, because it doesn't have the nuance of your voice making clear your intentions. So if you're directing online, please try to make sure even more that you come across in a friendly and helpful way. Don't know if Jonathan or anyone else has got anything to say about that, or if Patsy's got any follow-ups from that.
We've got some other questions for you, Gordon, that have come in. Sarah had a question. Sarah, do you want to tell us your question about the stop card?
Yes, I've been called to a table where the opener has produced the stop card, put it on the table, and then thought better of it and done nothing. And then I've been called. What did we say in that situation?
Well, the stop card is not a call itself, so they haven't actually done anything, and the stop card simply goes back in the bidding box. It has, however, provided the partner of the bidder with some unauthorized information, because it suggests, assuming that I put down a stop card and then I take it away and decide I'm going to bid one heart, it tells my partner that I've got a hand that's borderline with doing something else. Now, precisely what that other thing is not very clear, because I might have been on the borderline between opening one heart and two hearts, weak two hearts, or I might have been on the borderline between opening one heart or two clubs. So it probably doesn't immediately give their partner any unauthorized information that's useful. But later in the auction, you have to remember that this information is still there even later on. So if it becomes clear later in the auction that I've shown a strong hand, or the player's shown a strong hand, then it does suggest that they were on the borderline with opening two clubs. If they later show a weak hand, it suggests that they're very weak. So you simply tell the partner to avoid making use of any unauthorized information that comes from it, and ask the entire table to call you back if they feel there's a problem about it at the end. But the main thing is the stop card itself is not a call. It's just part of the process, and it just gets put away.
Thank you. And that applies equally, with the same caveats as to unauthorized information, if it happens during the course of the bidding, not just the...
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. One thing that can happen with the stop card is that people can sometimes put it on the table when they intended to double or they can do the opposite, and they can put a double on the table when they intended to make a stop card, put the stop card there, because they're the same colour and they're in the same part of the bidding box. And in either of those cases, if that was not their intention, then we would treat it as an unintended. If they make the double instead of a stop card, then we would treet that as an unintended call, and they would be able to correct that. Can we just get everyone to mute their microphones so that we don't have everyone talking at the same time? So yes, it's exactly the same. Just say, let me know if you think there's a problem, and leave them to it.
Very much.
Thank you. And Alan, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. First of all, a huge thanks to Jonathan for getting me out of that hole of getting my results up to EBU score using the 749. I think he was on his way to the shops at the time. So many thanks. The question was really, we've got EBU score pairs, but we've also got club pairs. I just wondered what we should be using these days and what the general direction was. Many thanks.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can speak to that one. So, I mean, EBU score pairs is used by, well, it's obviously used by lots of clubs, but it's also used by the EBU for running tournaments, and so has quite a lot of functionality in there, which we need for tournaments, but which probably isn't useful or helpful for clubs. And because of that, and over the years, it's become quite bloated. And for clubs that are used to using it, it's probably not a problem because they know which bits are relevant for them, and they just ignore the rest of it. However, for clubs if a club is switching and just starting to use, is switching and is either going to is thinking about using EBU score, then they may prefer to try using club pairs because it's a bit more simplified. The functionality, it's just got in there the functionality that we think will be of use to clubs, and so it may be, if they're using it for the first time, it's probably more straightforward and easier to use. But both will continue to exist, both will be supported, so you can use whichever one you prefer. And if you're comfortable using EBU score, then there's no real reason to switch.
The reason it was introduced was that a number of people said who were using a different scoring program, and they had the option to use EBU score, which is one of the benefits of affiliation. They said they weren't doing it because they found it a bit too complicated. So we thought we would try and do something that would make life easier for them to do. And it probably helps if you have a number of directors, some of whom are not terribly proficient, then it's probably easier for them. But you can still, if you have a special game, you want to run a Swiss pairs occasionally, and you've got a director who knows how to use that, you've still got the option to use the Swiss pairs scorer or, you know, any of the more complicated things. So it's simply about providing the right thing for the situation and for the clubs. I see there's also a couple of questions in the chat from Steve Wilson. Touching bidding cards and then passing. Well, you need to encourage players not to do that. Once again, that does give unauthorized information. If I touch the back of the bidding box and then end up passing, it tells them that I was on the borderline for opening the bidding. So encouraging people to not do that and explaining to them what the issue is. You know, say to them, don't go near the bidding box until you know what you're going to do. It's probably a wise advice just in terms of playing bridge anyway, to think out what you're going to do before you start to do it. Slow play, that's the bugbear for all of us in all games, and there's no really simple method. You do need to keep on at people. If you can make sure that your first round of a game runs to time, then that sets the pace for people and it's much easier to keep going. But if a pair really is very slow, you may end up having to take away boards. It's a matter, this is something that comes down to the TD's judgment about how how to deal with slow play. It can occasionally get so bad that you want to encourage people not to play in certain games, faster games. If you have a game that's for less experienced players, then that may be a more appropriate place for them to be there. And finally, he's asked claims when there is a trump outstanding. Well, it isn't the case that you automatically get a trick if there's a trump outstanding. There are a couple of bits. You need to go, as always, into the law book, read the relevant bits about claims, and that will tell you that what you need to consider is, first of all, is it likely that the person claiming was unaware of the trump? And that's not always the case. If somebody claims in 7 spades at trick 1 because they can see all the tricks and because they know that they've got all the trumps there, doesn't mean they've forgotten about the trump. It means that they know that nothing can damage them and they're just going to draw the trumps. So you need to consider, do we think that they knew there was a trump outstanding? And then if they didn't know that there was a trump outstanding, is there a way of the opponents getting it by any normal line of play? And then you have to look at what all the normal lines of play are. And we generally consider that if somebody thinks that all their tricks are good, all their cards are good, they would play them in almost any order. So unless it's something really outlandish, you would give them the worst of the normal lines of play. And if that allows the opponents to get a trump trick, then you give the trick to them. There are other messages come in.
Ian has a question. He's been waiting for some time.
Right.
So over to Ian.
Am I unmuted?
No, you are unmuted. I can hear you, Ian.
Right. Thank you very much. Morning, everyone. At Weatherby, we use Bridgemates and Scorebridge. And this is a question really for Jonathan, who has helped me out in the past. When we're entering a session code, our normal session code is 10. For some of our sort of training sessions, we use a code of 11. If we enter the wrong code and then it gets uploaded to the EBU, is there a way that we can correct it, or does it have to be annoying Jonathan to do it?
Yeah, no, you can. So if I quickly log on to a club, oh, my help, I should share my screen. So just quickly share this. So yes, so at the point, so I guess with Scorebridge, it's going straight up and you're not logging on to my EBU. Is that the case?
We upload through Pianola.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So yes, what you can do, but yes, if you realise that it's not gone up with the right code, what you can do is log on and delete the session and then upload it again. So so this is obviously for a club. So if I just realise one of these sessions is wrong and I need to delete it, what you need to do is just click on the session. It'll open the results and you can click delete session, and that will just remove it, and then you can upload it again.
But once we've deleted it, I couldn't see a way of getting back to the original starting point when you're setting the session up to say what code it needs to be. Can you do that at the point you're uploading?
You can do that at the point that you're uploading into my EBU. There is a drop-down menu. Now, normally people don't even look at it because it says what they want it to say, but you can change it at that point. The other thing is that you can, if you're uploading through Pianola, you can delete through Pianola. The advantage of that is really only if you have preset sessions, because then it will use exactly the same session number. And if you do that, go back into the scoring program, correct the session, correct the code you've used, and then recreate a new UMS file and upload it there. It's also worth saying, though, that for us in the office, it's extremely easy, as long as it's a current event, extremely easy for us to change it. So don't ever feel shy about asking us to do it. We have a separate bit of software. We simply click on it, change the number, that's it. It really is a 2-second job. So we don't mind doing it.
Okay, thanks for your help.
what have we got here? We've got right. Alan asked about the document, and Jonathan said he will do that. I don't know how many people are aware of documents that already exist. There are a number of documents about EBU Score and about scoring that already exist. There's a wiki for EBU Score, and there's also a nice PDF document that Robin created that it covers some of the most usual situations, things that arise. So having a look on the website is good. There are also, going back to the earlier thing about being a tournament director, there are a number of documents that have been created for tournament directors. Many of them are for national tournament directors, but not all of them. And they cover a variety of topics, and they're in the laws and ethics section of the website. There are things like slow play, claims, that kind of thing. They probably appeal more to the kind of people who are very into being a tournament director. You know, I think of tournament directors in clubs as being a couple of different kinds of people. One are the people who simply do it as I started doing it because it has to be done. Somebody's got to do it, and they'd really rather just get through it and that's the end of it. And there are people who discover that they find it very interesting, and for them there are lots of things that they can read in the laws and ethics section of the EBU website.
Yeah, so just to add to what Gordon was saying, this is the wiki for EBU Score. You've got, and there are a number of clubs that have written manuals, quite comprehensive manuals, which are very much, I mean, this one from Olicano, as an example, it covers all the programs, and it's sort of very step by step with screenshots, so that can be very useful. And there is also and then there is also this one, which is that takes you through everything. So yeah, there is lots of manuals available on the wiki.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we've got one other presentation to show you. I'll be very, very quick with this one because I think our interaction is really, really more important in many ways. But I will go through this just quickly, and some of you may have, particularly wanted to see it. So now, and the subject is how to direct in a friendly manner. So let me just get this up. Yeah, so hopefully you can see my slide here. I was very struck by this comment by Abby Smith, who's one of our directors on the EBU board and also runs a very successful club aimed more at novice players, that the attitude of the director in the session is really going to determine the atmosphere of the session itself. So if and that really that is the starting point, and also the most important thing that I have to say on this subject, that the director, the way you direct, is going to determine the friendliness of the session in many cases. I mean, sometimes there's going to be a very awkward player or something you can do nothing about. So I want to be realistic, but equally this is super, super important. And the other thing that struck me about this is that we tend to focus on the role of the director about resolving issues at the table, because that's kind of the difficult thing that we have to learn a lot about. But actually, there's much, much more to it than that part of the role. So, just a quick flick through some of the things that directors have to do. Before the session starts, they have a lot of work to do. In fact, I often think that once the first cards are drawn from the boards, most of the work is actually done and I can relax. So, the obvious thing, arrive early, get plenty of help, have lots of volunteer help, make sure everything's in place. That's going to really help when it comes to running the session. You're going to be more relaxed, and therefore the session is going to be more relaxed. Also, on the subject of selecting a movement, I wanted just to say that club preferences do change over time. I think, 20 years ago, maybe it was more common for clubs to want to play as much bridge as possible. And they had, let's make sure we play 27 boards on a Tuesday and so on. And that may have changed as new people come into the game, learnt later in life, maybe a bit more socially oriented, and they want to play a bit slower, maybe have a break and things. So think carefully about the movement, and whether that is the right thing for the club at the current time. So just to mention also the formal start of the session, I think this is super important for whether the session feels friendly or not. What you say right at the beginning. So we're going to make sure that we welcome any visitors by name. We're going to make sure that we don't take too long over announcements, because perhaps if there's 5 minutes on why you should go to the charity garden party next month, then that's not going to help you when it comes to asking for a quick pace of play. And also to offer help, to set the director's role as one of being helpful. It's not about applying rules so much as being helpful and fixing problems. Just simply saying that at the beginning, any problems or queries, I'm here to help, then everybody knows that is the case. During the session, so I think I skipped a slide there. The director has some jobs to do. Calling the movement is one of them. One of the most interesting things is when to call the movement. Do you wait for every table to finish? Styles vary. I personally think that if you want people to play quickly, you need to call the movement a little bit before the last table is finished. Otherwise, nobody has that sense of urgency about it. They know that they've got as much time as they need, so they perhaps take their time more. But in a way, it's whatever works at your club and for you. Noting that there is, I believe, a regulation that no table should start a new board after the movement had been called. But equally, any table that has started a board by pulling the cards out of the board, they should be allowed to finish it. So we're also going to try and check that everyone has the right boards, the right pairs are placed. We're going to keep our ears open during the session for any excessive chatter. Very difficult getting the balance. We want people to enjoy themselves. We want them to be able to have a quiet chat after they finished a board, but equally, we know that too much noise, the session gets out of control, nobody can concentrate, and it becomes a bit more like a party than a bridge session, and that's not good at all. So yeah, and your own attitude when people come to your table. You're the director, you're setting the flavor. So if you're the one who's very welcoming to people and make sure that you follow all the best behavior in bridge principles, that's also going to help set the flavor for the session. So all very obvious. Yeah, but just really to make this point again, that quite often you're never called in a session. It's wrong to think that the director's role is mainly about applying the rules. Much more than that. Our goal is for everyone to enjoy the bridge. If we finish the session thinking, well, this was a good session, no rules were breached, well, it was a good thing that no rules were breached, but maybe that wasn't actually the whole point of the session. I think finishing the session and thinking that was a good session, everybody enjoyed it, is really when we know that we've done a good job. So strive for that. Don't worry if things go wrong, never panic. Make sure that you understand you can get help if you need it. Yeah, and just this thing, I mean, it's been said many times before, but Gordon mentioned it as well. Need to make sure everyone understands the role of the director, which is to help, not to punish. Also, just a word about self-directing. Sometimes players self-direct. May seem like a good time saver sometimes, but in general, it can be quite unhelpful, especially as every club has that one player who is sure that they know all the rules, and actually they don't, So personally, I think even if you're an experienced director playing, and a problem comes up, you should still call the director. You shouldn't say, well, I've done the course, I know the answer. Just call the director, and then everybody knows where they stand. And there's no aggravation. And particularly this thing about, well, you can't bid because your partner hesitated, absolutely unacceptable. It's not for us to tell people whether they can or can't bid. That's something where if we're worried about a problem, we need to call the director, and then the director can advise. Yeah, that's all that. And finally, just to say, we're running club sessions. We know how to run bridge at a very high standard of fairness. We have screens. We ask questions and answer them when authorized by notes rather than speaking. It's all very expert, but that's not what we're doing in the local club. And in particular, always be aware of the context. novices and weaker players will make more mistakes. We need to smile a lot, apply the rules, yes, but in a way that makes them feel that it's a learning opportunity. It's not something where they're being punished. Otherwise, if they receive any sort of aggressive behavior or tone regarding mistakes that are made, they'll just make more mistakes and end up not coming. And we need all the bridge players we can get. We want them to be in our sessions and want them to enjoy it. So that is super, super important. Yeah, and I think we've already mentioned some of the ways you can get help. And that's all I have to say. So just very quickly, to make some of those points, and especially never forget your main role is not just about applying rules, but about running the session, and there's a lot more to it than just knowing everything in the various books that we've discussed.
We've got one more question from Sarah Dixon there, haven't we? In the drop down.
Yes, we have. So she says, is the requirement that a table has pulled the cards to be allowed to finish? A regulation of the club can vary. So what about, Gordon, what about a table they've started, but they're well behind? Can we stop them playing the board?
Well, the laws say that when you've taken your cards out, then you have started the board. So you certainly should let them finish. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't catch up, because if they're very slow, you can take away a board from the next round. You can say to them, you're not going to be able to play this board unless you've got plenty of time for the next board. The other very important thing about this, and we get asked this a lot, people who take away a board for whatever reason, they want to just say, get your session score, which they do by putting in not played in the Bridgemate. And this is wrong. This is not what the laws say. The laws say that if you take away a board, if a board can't be played for any reason, then you need to give them average plus, average minus, or average, depending on the degree of fault for it being the case. So if a table is very slow and they've just managed to start playing the board before the move was called, then let them play it out, but say to them, particularly if they're several minutes into the next round, say to them, the next table you will only be able to play one fewer board unless you have caught up in time to play the final one. So don't start that. And then you will make sure that at the table where they can't play it, the people who are sitting there waiting, of course, are entirely not at fault. So you give them average plus, and you would normally give the other pair, the ones who've come late, average minus. Occasionally you will think it wasn't their fault. Imagine that somebody else spilt something on the table and that's the reason they're slow. Then of course it's not their fault. But generally the people who are slow are at fault and they should be getting average minus. I think tournament directors are much too keen on keeping the peace by giving averages rather than average minus when they shouldn't be. So I can say this as many times as I do, and I know that people will generally ignore it because they want to keep people happy. But remember that if you have a slow game, it makes other people unhappy. So you do need to try and find a balance between these things. But once they've started the board, let them finish playing it.
So just on that question, Gordon, about averaging, would you take account of maybe someone who's having to use a card holder because they can't hold cards, you know, physical issues that might affect their speed of play in those sorts of judgments?
Absolutely. You should certainly be doing, we all do everything that we possibly can to accommodate people who have disabilities, restrictions on what they can do, their movement. It can get to a point where it becomes a little bit difficult. If somebody's really going to be terribly slow all the time, then you might be thinking about whether or not this is the best game for them. But aside from that, try to accommodate them as much as you can. You don't want this to be happening every round, though. So if somebody has this difficulty and they're never going to be able to get better at it, then that is probably going to affect the entire game, and it's not fair on everyone else. But by and large, somebody who's slow because they're slow on one occasion because they had this problem, and again, you know, the dexterity thing, maybe they've knocked their hand on the floor and it takes time to pick it up, to sort it out, knock their bidding box on the floor, that kind of thing, then yes, you should say, well, this person has arthritis and she's she's been unable to play to time because of that. We don't want to be punishing her. We want to be doing everything we can to help her and encourage her. We always have to use judgment. That's what being a tournament director is all about, using judgment and trying to help people as much as possible.
Great, thank you so much. Bob, you have a question?
Yeah, yes, I have. Can you hear me all right? Yeah.
Yep.
Just two. The first one's a very quick one. I fully endorse your assertions, Tim, that the director should set a good tone for the evening and a good example at their table. The first question is, if you overhear somebody self-directing at another table, but they don't actually call you, should you intervene and sort that out?
The laws say that a director should deal with any problem they become aware of in any way. So yes, they do tell you that. However, it's also considered good TD practice not to try to get yourself involved too much if you can avoid it. And for that reason, it's generally considered a bad idea for a non-playing tournament director to sit and watch a table. Because if you sit and watch a table and there's a revoke and nobody else notices, nobody at the table, one side has been damaged by you being there because you now have to do something when nobody else was going to notice. So it's a good idea to avoid that. But yes, if somebody is self-directing, I would go and, again, in a friendly way, say it's much better if you call me and I can try and sort it out. You know, then it gives everyone confidence at the table that it's the right ruling, something along those lines.
Yeah, and okay, thank you, Gordon. The second question is, if you get called to a table and it's quite a complex issue and you obviously have to deal with it there and then with both pairs present, it can delay the round and also affect other tables for the next round because they're waiting for your table to move and they're waiting for the table you're dealing with to move. So it affects about 4 pairs. But can you do anything about that? Say there's a revoke situation and it's very complicated and you have to restore equity, which happened the other night.
Well, you don't need to restore you don't need to restore equity at that moment. You get them to play. You deal with all the mechanical aspects of the revoke. And then at the end, you say, while you're doing that, you say, and if you think that you would have got even more tricks than this if it had been played out, you tell me. Now, that second bit can be dealt with at any stage. It can be dealt with at the end of the evening, as long as everyone's clear what happens. Now, if you have a table with 4 players who won't remember any of the play, it does become a bit more difficult. But then players who don't remember any of the play generally are not likely to feel that they've been damaged more than that anyway. So main thing is deal with what you have to at the table, deal with all the other aspects later on if you can. But it is part of the skill of being a tournament director that you manage to deal with things in time as much as possible, and you try to hurry people along a little bit, explain things clearly to them. None of it is always going to be easy, Bob.
You're telling me. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any more questions? Now is your opportunity to ask questions with a very expert panel present to answer them, so do take advantage.
I suspect we've probably said enough or more than enough, so I'm sure they'll be happy to go away and think about it. But do remember the resources on the website. And if you have questions, you can always send emails to me or Jonathan or any other tournament director. Many people have their own favourite tame national tournament director who they know and they go and ask questions to, and that's a good thing to do as well.
And as always, the recording of this seminar will be available on the website. So if you don't remember everything we said, then you can always go and watch it.
Very impressed by the patience of all of you who have sat here for so long and listening to us talking, but I hope it has some value.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So if there's nothing else, thank you for coming, and see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.